She stood alone in a rich man's rail car with a dead man's ledger in her hand and a paring knife up her sleeve, looking across a polished walnut table at the railroad baron who had ordered her father beaten to death with a silver cane. He was smiling. He thought he had won. He did not know that 40 miles up the mountain, 3 men had buried 8 of his hired killers in the snow that morning. He did not know that the book she had brought him was a forgery, and he did not know that behind him, through the service door of his own private car, the tallest man in Colorado was about to walk in with a United States Marshal and 30 deputies on the siding at his back. Friends gather close to the fire. This is the story of a wedding dress that walked out of a Boston parlor in blood, a ledger that waited 9 years to hang a guilty man, and 3 mountain men who learned one January morning that they were not alone in the world after all. The snow came down like it had something to prove. She stepped off the platform of Timber Ridge Station in a wedding dress that was never meant to touch the ground, let alone the black ice of a Colorado railway bed in January of 1887. The hem was torn, the silk was stained, and the blood that crusted along the lace cuffs was not her own. Her name was Emmeline Hartwell. She was 23 years old. And 3 nights ago, in a house on Beacon Hill in Boston, she had watched a man beat her father to death with a silver-handled cane. She did not know, standing on that frozen platform with her breath turning to crystals in the bitter air, that 3 mountain men were about to walk out of the storm and change the course of her life. She did not know that the small leather satchel she clutched to her chest contained a ledger that could hang a railroad baron and avenge a massacre 9 years old. She did not know that the man who would find her first carried his own dead wife in his heart like a stone, and that he had sworn on a grave he dug with his own hands to never let another woman die in his house. She knew only that her lips were blue, that her fingers had stopped feeling anything a long while back, that the letter in her coat pocket, the one that promised a marriage and a good home, had been written by the same hand that held the cane. She knew only that if she sat down in the snow, she would not get up. So she stood. Before we go deeper into this story, friends, if this is your first time joining us by the fire, hit that subscribe button down below. I bring you a new frontier tale every week, stories of hard men and brave women, and the country that shaped them both. And leave me a comment. Tell me where in this great country you are listening from tonight. I read every single one. Now let me take you up the mountain. 3 weeks before she stepped off that train, Emmeline Hartwell was helping her father with the books. Theodore Hartwell was a quiet man. He wore round spectacles and kept his ledgers in a straight line on the shelf above his desk. He had buried his wife when Emmy was 9 years old, and he had raised his daughter in the way that a kind father raises a quiet girl, by teaching her the things men thought women should not know. He taught her French. He taught her how to read a newspaper without letting the editor do the thinking for her. He taught her accounting, the long double entry kind that keeps a man honest whether he wants to be or not. For 17 years, he had been the head accountant for the Blackwood Railway Consortium, a firm run out of a brick building on State Street by a man named Augustus Blackwood. Augustus had a younger brother named Hollis. Hollis was 30 years old, handsome in the way that snakes are handsome, and he had been calling at the Hartwell parlor for 6 months by the time Theodore came home one November evening with his face gone the color of old paper. He sat Emmy down at the kitchen table. He took off his spectacles. He folded them. He placed them beside the sugar bowl with a care that frightened her more than anything he had yet said. Then he pulled a black leather book from inside his coat. "Emmeline," he said, "if anything happens to me, you take this to the United States Marshal in Denver. Not Boston, not New York, Denver. You put it in the hand of a man named Wade Kingston, and you do not give it to anyone else. Not a priest, not a policeman, not your aunt. Do you hear me, child? I hear you, Papa. Swear it, I swear." He put the book in her hands. It was heavier than a book that size should have been. 3 days later, the Blackwood brothers came to the Hartwell house. Emmy was upstairs, pinning the hem of a wedding dress she had not asked to wear. The ceremony was set for the following morning. Her Aunt Millicent had arranged the match the way other women arrange flowers, with a firm hand and no consultation. Hollis Blackwood was a good catch, Millicent said. Augustus was a powerful man. A girl in Emmy's position with no mother and a father who did bookkeeping could not afford to be particular. She heard the front door open. She heard her father greet the brothers with the calm voice he used for difficult conversations. She heard Augustus Blackwood, a man of 55 with a voice like a knife drawn slowly across whetstone, ask her father one simple question. Where is the ledger? Theodore, Emmeline set down her pincushion. She did not go down the stairs. Something in her father's silence told her not to. She crept instead to the top of the landing, and through the rail she saw her father standing very straight in his shirt sleeves, his hands loose at his sides, and she saw Hollis Blackwood lift the silver-handled cane that Millicent had always admired. What happened next took less than 3 minutes. It would take Emmy 20 years to forget any part of it. When it was done, when her father was a shape on the parlor rug that she refused to look at, a second time, she did the thing her father had asked her to do. She pulled the black ledger from the cedar chest under the window seat. She wrapped it in oilcloth. She put it in her traveling satchel, along with $40 in coin and a cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother. Then she put on the wedding dress because there was no time to change, and she climbed out through the second-story window and down the rose trellis her father had built when she was 11 years old. She ran to the station. She bought a ticket to Denver with shaking hands. And in the panic and the dark, in the sound of her own heart, she climbed aboard the wrong train. A train that ran north and west instead of west and south. A train that carried her through 3 days and 2 nights of sleepless terror up into the high country of the Colorado Territory, up into the silver mining belt, up into a town she had never heard of, into weather she was not dressed for, into the opening pages of a story she had not chosen. The train pulled into Timber Ridge at 11 in the morning on the 6th of January. The conductor tried to say something kind to her as she stepped down. She did not hear him. The cold was louder than his voice. She walked to the edge of the platform. She looked out at the town. There was no one waiting for her. There was no one waiting for anyone. Timber Ridge on a January morning in 1887 was a place the winter had swallowed. Chimney smoke climbed straight up from a dozen roofs. The horses at the hitching rail stood with their heads down. Somewhere a door banged once, then stopped. Emmeline Hartwell sat down behind a stack of shipping crates because she did not want to be seen and because her legs would no longer hold her. She pressed the leather satchel against her chest. She watched her breath, and she waited to see what would happen. 40 miles to the southwest, the Thorne brothers were coming down the mountain. They came in the order they always came. Silas rode first on the big black mare named Midnight, the reins loose in his left hand, his right hand resting on the stock of the Winchester slung across his saddle. He was 35 years old that winter, though the weather and the work had put 10 more years into his face. He stood 6 feet and 7 inches barefoot. His hair was the color of a chestnut after a rainstorm. His eyes were the color of whiskey held up to a lamp, and they missed nothing. Behind him came Barnaby. Barn, his brothers called him. He was 32, an inch shorter than Silas, and built like a draft horse, with hair the color of dark honey and eyes the same hot amber as his brothers. Barnaby did not speak much. He had spent 3 months in the summer of 1876 with the 7th Cavalry in the hills above the Rosebud Creek, and he had come home a quieter man than he had left. He carried a harmonica in his coat pocket and a Colt Peacemaker on his hip, and he had not slept indoors for the whole of the year after he came home from the Indian campaigns. The pines had let him sleep. It was a thing he did not explain. And behind Barnaby rode Elijah the youngest, Eli to his brothers. He was 30 years old, but something in the set of his mouth kept him looking 23, a kindness that had not yet been argued out of him. His hair was auburn, near red in the firelight, and his eyes were whiskey-colored like his brother's, though a shade warmer. He wore his hat pushed back. He had opinions, and he shared them freely. He was the one who laughed first and the one who stood longest at a grave. The 3 of them had grown up on Thorne Ridge, a homestead 40 miles into the mountains from the town of Timber Ridge. They had been raised on that land by a man named Elias Thorne and a woman named Ruth, who had come up from Missouri in 1860 with a wagon, 2 oxen, and a baby Silas on Ruth's hip. Elias and Ruth Thorne had died in the autumn of 1878 in the span of a single week of what the town doctor had called cholera. Silas had been 26 that autumn. Barnaby had been 23. Elijah had been 21. The three of them had dug two graves behind the barn, had stood in the October wind with their hats in their hands, and had made a promise to each other and to the land that they would hold Thorn Ridge against anything the mountain or the men in it might throw their way. They had held it for 9 years. They were coming down this particular January morning for the same reasons they always came down. Nails, flour, coffee, medicine against the fevers that came with deep winter. A new mule for Elijah, whose old mule Daisy was going gray in the muzzle. The telegraph, which sometimes had news from Denver, and sometimes had news from Missouri, and sometimes just had news of weather coming. They tied their horses at the rail in front of the general store. Silas said he would walk down to the station to post a letter. Barnaby went into the telegraph office. Elijah went to the livery to look at mules. The storm was already gathering over the peaks when Silas started down the boardwalk. He could smell it in the wind. He could see it in the way the jays had gone quiet in the aspen behind the station. He buttoned his heavy bison hide coat up to his throat, and he stepped onto the platform of Timber Ridge Station, and he stopped. Something at the far end of the platform was white, where nothing should be white. He walked slowly. He kept his right hand loose near the knife on his belt, because a man who has lived alone in high country for 9 winters does not walk toward a thing he does not recognize without keeping one hand free. He rounded the stack of crates. He stopped again. She was not a snowdrift. She was a woman young and small-boned and half-frozen, wrapped in a wedding dress that had been good silk before the road had ruined it. Her hair was the color of honey in a jar. Her lips were blue. Her eyes, when she lifted her face, were the color of a cornflower in June, and they were staring at him with the exact look a hunted deer has when the dogs have closed the last piece of ground. He took off his hat. He did it slow. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was lower and gentler than even his brothers ever heard it. "Ma'am, you are freezing to death right there where you sit." Her right hand moved. From inside the sleeve of that ruined wedding dress, she drew a small paring knife. The blade was no longer than her thumb. Her hand was shaking so hard the blade jittered in the cold light. "Stay back," she whispered. "I will cut you." Silas did not move. He looked at the knife. He looked at her face. He did not see a woman who wanted to stab a man. He saw a woman who had been taught, very recently and very thoroughly, that every man she met from now until the end of her life might be the man who hurt her. He did the only thing a man like Silas Thorne knew how to do at a moment like that. He took off his coat. The bison hide weighed almost 50 pounds. It still held the heat of his body. He laid it down flat on the boards of the platform 3 paces away from her, and he took 1 step back. "Ma'am," he said, "I will not come any closer than I am right now. You can keep that knife. You can keep it the whole time, but the cold is going to kill you inside the hour. And I would take it poorly if you died 10 feet from me when I had a coat I was not using. My name is Silas Thorne. I live 40 miles from here, up in the high country. I have 2 brothers. One of them is in that telegraph office right there, and the other one is trying to buy a mule. If you let me bring them here, they will stand exactly where I am standing, and they will not come a step closer either. Will that do?" She looked at him for a long time. Her breath was shallow. Her eyes had that glassy shine that the cold puts in a person right before the cold finishes its work. The knife dropped into her lap. She did not hand him the coat. She did not reach for it. She simply slumped sideways into the crates, and her eyes closed, and she did not open them again. Silas moved then. He crossed the 3 paces in one stride. He gathered her up, coat and satchel and all, and she weighed less than a saddle. He wrapped her in the bison hide. He pressed his bare palm against her cheek, and he felt how little heat was left in her, and something he had locked up in a box 9 years ago pushed one finger against the inside of the lid. Barnaby came out of the telegraph office and saw his brother carrying a bride. Elijah came around the corner of the livery and saw it too. The 3 of them met on the boardwalk in front of the general store. Silas said Elijah, and his voice was not quite level. Silas, you are not bringing another dead woman home. Silas looked at his youngest brother with the eyes of a man who had been asked this before and who had answered it before. She is not dead yet, Silas said, and she is not going to be. Who is she, said Barnaby. I do not know. What is she running from? I do not know. Whose blood is that on her dress? Silas looked down at the hem of the silk. The stain was dark. It was old. It had frozen into the lace. It is not hers, he said. The three brothers looked at one another. The storm had closed in fully now. The wind had come up off the peaks. Snow was falling thick enough that the far end of Main Street was already a gray blur. Load the supplies, Silas said. Elijah opened his mouth. Load the supplies, Elijah. Elijah shut his mouth and went to load the supplies. Barnaby looked at the woman in his brother's arms. He looked at his brother's face. He had seen that face once before on a morning in the autumn of 1878 when Silas had carried a different woman out of the room at the back of the house. Barnaby did not say what he was thinking. He turned and went to saddle the horses. They rode out of Timber Ridge at 12:40 in the afternoon. The sky by then was the color of wet slate. The wind had teeth. Silas held Emmeline in front of him on midnight, wrapped in the bison hide, her head against his chest. He did not feel the cold on his shirt. He felt the small, quick flutter of her breath against his collarbone, and he adjusted his riding to keep that breath alive, and he did not speak for 9 miles. At the 9-mile marker where the trail bent up into the lodgepole pines, Elijah pulled his horse alongside. Silas. What? She is holding that satchel like it has her heart in it. I know. You going to open it? Not yet. Why not? Because a thing a woman holds that tight when she is half dead deserves to be opened by her and not by me. Elijah looked at his brother for a long moment. Then he nodded. He fell back into line. They reached the ridge at twilight. The cabin of the Thorne brothers was not a cabin in the small sense of the word. It was a 2-story timber house their father had built in the summer of 1865 with walls of hand-hewn pine, 8 inches thick, a stone chimney of Colorado granite, and a roof pitched steep against the weight of snow. A barn stood off to the north, a smokehouse off to the south, a root cellar dug into the hillside, a woodyard stacked with split pine enough to last 6 months of winter, and a second yard behind that stacked with split oak kept back for the coldest weeks. It was a working homestead. It was a fortress. It was the only home the three of them had ever had, and since the autumn of 1878, it had held no woman at all. Silas carried Emmeline across the threshold at 6 minutes past 6 in the evening. He laid her on the pine cot nearest the stone hearth. Elijah built up the fire. Barnaby set water to boil. Silas knelt beside the cot and he did what had to be done. He cut the wedding dress off her. He did it with his hunting knife, and he did it fast because the silk had frozen to her skin, and every minute it stayed, there was a minute closer to the cold taking her for good. He turned his face away as he worked. He called over his shoulder for a flannel shirt and a wool blanket, and he covered her with both the moment the last of the silk was gone. It was in that moment, before the blanket came down, that he saw them. He did not mean to see them. He saw them because there was no way not to. Across her back from the base of her neck down to the small of her spine were bruises. Some were yellow and fading. Some were purple and fresh. They had the shape of a man's open hand. Her wrists bore red rings that had been made by rope and more recently by iron. The marks on her wrists were not old. Some of them were 4 days old. Some of them were less. Silas Thorne pulled the blanket up to her chin. He stood up very slowly. He walked across the room to the window. He put his palms flat on the sill. He looked out into the black storm where nothing could be seen but the white lines of snow against the glass, and he stood there for a full minute without moving. When he turned around, his face had gone to stone. Barnaby was watching him from the stove. Barnaby did not ask. Barnaby did not need to ask. That night, the storm closed down on Thorne Ridge with a violence that even the brothers who had lived through 9 winters on that mountain would later say had been the worst of their lives. The wind came down off the peaks at speeds that no man could measure. The snow fell sideways. The temperature dropped until the iron handle of the front door burned a man's palm like a brand. Inside, the fire was kept high. Silas sat in a straight-back chair pulled 6 feet from the cot. He sat with his Winchester across his knees. He did not sleep. Elijah and Barnaby took turns at the window at the rifle ports, cutting the shutters, at the boiling water, at the quiet work of keeping a person alive who had not yet decided to stay alive. At 3 in the morning, Emmeline Hartwell opened her eyes. She did not know where she was. She saw a ceiling of pine beams. She smelled wood smoke and coffee and a clean soap she did not recognize. She felt the weight of a wool blanket over her, and under the blanket, a man's flannel shirt that came nearly to her knees. She moved her hand worked. She turned her head. A man was sitting in a chair by the fire. He was not the big one who had given her the coat. He was younger and his hair was nearly red in the firelight, and he was watching her with the careful, polite expression of a man who had been told to watch a door and was determined not to do his job badly. He saw her eyes open. He raised one hand slowly. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Elijah Thorne. You are in my brother's house 40 miles from the town where he found you. No one here is going to touch you. My oldest brother has his rifle at the front of the house, and my middle brother is in the loft with another one, and that is only because a storm came in off the peaks, and we do not know yet who might be trying to come through it after you. You are safe. You are as safe as anyone can be on this mountain in weather like this. Do you understand me?" She looked at him a long time. "Water," she whispered. He rose. He did not come close. He filled a tin cup at the stove and he set it on the small table by the cot, and he sat back down 6 feet away. "Thank you," she said. "You are welcome, ma'am. I am not a ma'am." He tilted his head a little. "What are you then?" She opened her mouth. She closed it again. She thought about her Aunt Millicent in the Boston parlor, and she thought about the silver-handled cane, and she thought about the train that had carried her 3 days north of everything she had ever known. "My name is Emma," she said. "Emma Wells." Elijah Thorne nodded slowly. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Miss Wells, you rest now. My brother Silas is going to want to talk with you come morning. He is a good man, the best I know, but he is not an easy one. You tell him what you can tell him. You keep what you need to keep. He will respect either way." She looked at the fire. She looked at the young man with the red hair who sat 6 feet from her and would not come closer. "Mr. Thorne," she said. "Yes, ma'am. There is a satchel. Leather. I had it when your brother found me. It is at the foot of the cot, miss. No one has opened it. No one will." She closed her eyes. Something inside her that had been holding itself up for 3 days and 3 nights let go just a little, just the corner of itself. Not all of it, not yet, but enough that she slept. Morning came gray and silent. The storm had not stopped. It had only settled into the long, steady fall that mountain folk knew would bury the pass for weeks. By first light, the snow against the north wall of the cabin was 6 feet deep. The barn was a dark hump against a white field. The wagon road down to Timber Ridge had vanished under the drift. There was Thorn Ridge, and there was the sky, and there was nothing in between. Silas set coffee on the table at 7. He set 3 plates. He set a fourth. He set a loaf of cornbread. His mother's iron skillet had baked 1,000 times. He set a crock of butter. He set a jar of wild honey. Then he walked to the door of the bedroom he had given her, and he knocked once gently. "Miss," he said, "breakfast is on the table when you are ready. Take your time." She came out 10 minutes later. She was wearing the flannel shirt and a pair of wool trousers that Elijah had rolled at the cuffs for her, and a pair of thick wool socks. Her honey hair was braided back. Her face was washed. She looked like a woman who had decided to walk through the next door, whether she was ready for what was behind it or not. The 3 brothers stood up from the table. She stopped. She had not expected 3 of them standing up at the same time. They filled the room, Silas at 6'7", Barnaby at 6'6", Elijah at 6'5", 3 sets of amber eyes looking at her with the same careful attention. She had lived her whole life in a house where one quiet man sat down to breakfast. She did not know what to do with three. Silas spoke first. Miss, please sit where you want. Where you. She sat at the chair nearest the door because that was the chair a person sat in when a person wanted a way out. Silas noticed. Silas did not comment. The three brothers sat back down. Barnaby passed her the cornbread. Elijah poured her coffee. No one asked her anything for a long time. Finally, Silas set his cup down. Miss, he said, I am going to say some things, and I would ask you to hear me out. You do not owe any of us anything, and you do not have to answer any question I ask. If you would rather I not ask you, say so, and I will not ask. She nodded, he nodded back. My name is Silas Thorne. These are my brothers, Barnaby and Elijah. This house was built by our father. Our mother died in the room where you slept last night. Our father died in the room above it. We have run this land for 9 winters without a woman in the house, and it has run us about as much as we have run it, and we have been glad to keep the quiet. He paused. Then the storm came in yesterday, he said, and you came in with it. She set down her fork. The main pass will be closed for 6 to 8 weeks, Silas said. The wagon road is under 10 feet of snow, and it will stay that way. A man with a good horse and a good compass can still get over Eagle's Pass if he knows the country, but no wagon is coming up from Timber Ridge until March at the earliest, and no party of men who has never crossed that ridge in winter is coming up either. We have food for 4. We have space for 4. You are welcome in this house as a guest. You will have the bedroom we gave you last night. My brothers and I will sleep in the loft and in the barn. You will cook if you want to cook. You will not cook if you do not. You will speak if you want to speak. You will be silent if you do not. When spring comes and the pass opens, we will take you wherever in this country you ask to be taken, and the 3 of us will not ask you to tell us one single thing you do not wish to tell us between now and then. He looked at her with those amber eyes. There is only one thing I need to ask you now, he said. She braced herself. Is there someone coming after you? Emmeline Hartwell sat very still. She looked at the 3 brothers. She looked at the fire in the great stone hearth. She looked at the leather satchel that sat untouched on the end of the pine cot through the open bedroom door. The satchel that held a ledger written in her dead father's hand, a ledger that named 47 men who had been killed on the orders of Augustus Blackwood, a ledger that could put a railroad baron on a gallows. She thought of the cane. She thought of the parlor rug. She thought of the letter in her pocket that had been written in a handwriting she now knew to be a killer's. Yes, she said. Silas Thorne nodded once. Then we are 4, he said, and reached for the cornbread as if nothing in the world had changed. But something in the world had changed. 40 miles down the mountain in a private car on a siding at the edge of Timber Ridge, a man named Hollis Blackwood was sitting by a coal stove with his boots off and a brandy glass in his hand. Across from him sat a man with a tin star on his vest, a man named Obadiah Crow, who had been the sheriff of Timber Ridge for 11 years, and who had for 9 of those years taken a monthly stipend from the Blackwood Railway Consortium in return for the specific work he was doing at this specific moment. Hollis took a sip of his brandy. Sheriff, he said, I am going to describe a woman to you. You are going to tell me if anyone has seen her. Obadiah Crow leaned forward. I am listening, Mr. Blackwood. 23 years of age, 5 feet 3 inches, honey blonde hair, blue eyes the particular blue of a cornflower, last seen in a silk wedding dress of navy trim. She would have been traveling alone. She would have been traveling scared. She got on the wrong train out of Boston 6 days ago. The ticket agent in Albany says she rode through to a connection that could have put her on either the westbound or the northbound. I have men on the westbound line. You are the northbound line. Crow thought for a moment. A woman like that in a wedding dress would have been remembered, he said. I can put the word out, quiet. I can have the station master checked. I can have the boarding houses asked. Before noon tomorrow, if she came through Timber Ridge, I will know. Hollis Blackwood smiled. He did not have a pleasant smile. There will be a reward, Sheriff. How much? $500 for word of her. $2,000 for her brought to me alive. Obadiah Crow set down his own glass. And dead Mr. Blackwood, Hollis Blackwood looked at the fire. She has taken something that belongs to my brother, he said. The item matters more than the woman. If the item comes back and the woman does not, my brother will not be unhappy. But he would strongly prefer, that she be brought to him alive so that he can look at her face while he burns the item in front of her. Understood, said the sheriff. There was a long pause. Then Hollis Blackwood said, Sheriff, there is a homestead somewhere up your mountain. Thorn Ridge, 3 brothers. Do they still hold that land? Obadiah Crow's eyes flicked up. They do. Hollis nodded. My brother has been patient with those 3 for 9 years, he said. My brother is running out of patience. If it turns out that the woman I am looking for has gone to ground anywhere near those 3, you will let me know that also. You will let me know that before you let me know anything else. Understood, said the sheriff again. The wind outside the private car howled against the steel panels like a living thing trying to get in. High up on the mountain in a house that had stood 9 winters against every storm the range could send, Emmeline Hartwell sat at a table with 3 quiet men and ate cornbread with wild honey and could not know that the long hunt for her had already begun. She only knew that she was warm. She only knew that for the first time in 6 days, she was not at this particular moment afraid. She only knew that when the oldest of the 3 brothers, the one with the whiskey-colored eyes, the one who had walked out of the storm and given her his coat, lifted his cup to take a drink of coffee, his hand trembled just once and then steadied. Winter had come to Thorn Ridge, and with it, though none of the 4 people at that table could yet have said so, had come the beginning of something that would either save them all or bury them all before the columbines came up again in May. The morning after the first storm, the wind finally stopped. It did not stop all at once. It stopped the way a man dies of old age in stages with long pauses between, until you realized the last gust had come and gone an hour back and you had not noticed. The silence that replaced it was the silence of a mountain in deep January, a silence so complete that a man could hear the snow settling on the roof 3 rooms away. Emmeline Hartwell stood at the bedroom window at first light and looked at a world she did not recognize. The barn was a pale hump against a white field. The smokehouse was barely visible. The wood yard that Elijah had described to her the night before, neat and stacked, and half a man's life of labor had become a single white shape under 6 feet of new snow. Out beyond the yard, the pines rose black against a sky the color of an old pewter plate, and beyond the pines, the peaks she could not yet name rose up and up until they lost themselves in cloud. She had never seen a thing so beautiful. She had never seen a thing so likely to kill her. A tap at the door, soft, the tap of a man who knew how to knock on a door that held a woman who had been hurt. Miss Wells, Silas's voice. Coffee is hot. Fire is built. Take your time. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. She heard his boots go back down the hall. She dressed in the flannel shirt and the rolled wool trousers Elijah had laid out for her the night before. She braided her hair. She looked in the small tin mirror above the washstand, and she did not recognize the woman who looked back. The bruise along her jaw had gone from purple to yellow at the edges. Her lips were chapped. Her eyes were older than they had been a week ago. She thought of her father. She did not let herself think of him long. She opened the door. The front room of the Thorne house was a long, low space with the great stone hearth at one end and the kitchen table at the other and a loft above both. The ceiling beams were hand-hewn pine-notched and pegged by a man who had built to last. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves held books. Not many, but more than she would have expected. A worn Bible, a volume of Shakespeare with a cracked spine, a book on veterinary medicine, an almanac, a thin brown book titled The Practical Cabinet Maker, which she suspected was the reason the table she was about to sit down at had been built so well it would outlive every person in the room. Silas was at the hearth, one boot up on the stone, pouring coffee from a blackened tin pot into a blue enameled cup. He saw her come in. He did not turn his whole body. He only lifted his head and nodded once the way a man nods to another man he respects. Miss Wells, come and sit by the fire. The table is cold until the stove catches up. She sat. He set the cup in front of her. He did not sit across from her. He sat one chair over. He understood without being told that a woman who had lately been hurt by a man did not want a man directly across from her at breakfast with his eyes on her every time she lifted her fork. Barnaby came in from the barn with an armful of pine kindling. He stamped the snow off his boots at the door. He nodded to her. "Morning, miss." He set the kindling in the wood box. He went to the stove and poured his own coffee. Elijah came down from the loft a minute later, his hair damp from the basin. He grinned at her. "Morning, Miss Wells. You slept. That is good. A body needs to sleep after what a body like yours has been through." She felt something behind her eyes. She pushed it down. "I did sleep, thank you. You eat eggs." "Yes, you eat bacon." "Yes. Then you will eat well this morning, miss, because Silas traded a man in town last month for a hog, and we are eating the last of it before spring." Elijah said Silas without looking up. "Yes, brother." "Sit down and let her drink her coffee." "Yes, brother." Elijah sat. He sat across from her, though. He did not have Silas's instinct for the right chair, but his face was the face of a boy who had never been cruel in his life, and something in Emmeline relaxed one small notch further. They ate. They ate in a silence that was not awkward. It was the silence of men who ate together every morning and did not need to fill the air. The coffee was strong enough to stand a spoon in. The eggs were fresh. The bacon was thick cut and smoked over hickory. The cornbread from the night before had been warmed in the oven and split open and dressed with honey. Halfway through the meal, Emmeline realized she was hungry. She had not been hungry in 6 days. She ate 3 pieces of bacon and 2 eggs and a large wedge of cornbread, and when she set her fork down, Silas got up quietly and refilled her plate without asking. She did not stop him. She ate the second plate slower. By the time she was done, she had tears in her eyes that she could not explain to herself. No one at the table pretended not to see. No one at the table commented. When the plates were cleared, Silas wiped his hands on a clean cloth, folded the cloth, and set it aside. He rested his forearms on the table. He looked at her. "Miss Wells, with your permission." "Yes, Mr. Thorne. I would like to say again in the daylight what I said last night. I want you to hear it with your full senses, not after 3 days of cold." "All right. We have enough stores for 4 of us through the end of March. This house has 4 bedrooms, counting the one you are in the small room off the pantry. My brothers and I have already moved our things. The loft is where Barnaby will sleep. The pantry room is where Elijah will sleep. I will take the bunk in the barn tack room. It is warm. It has its own stove. It was where I slept the first winter after my wife died, and it served me fine then, and it will serve me fine now." She opened her mouth. "Mr. Thorne, I cannot put you out of your own." He lifted one hand, not roughly, just enough to stop her. "You are not putting me out of anything, miss. I am telling you where I am going to sleep. Now, here's what I am asking of you. I am asking you to consider this house your house. From this morning until the pass opens, I am asking you to eat at this table. I am asking you to use the stove, the pantry, the books on that shelf, the wash tub in the back room, and anything else in this house you have need of. I am asking you to tell me or one of my brothers if there is a thing you lack, and we will do our level best to provide it. I am asking nothing of you in return. No cooking, no cleaning, no company, no conversation. If the 3 of us in this room turn out to be the last men in the territory you want to talk to, then we will eat in silence from now until April, and that will be fine." He paused. "I am asking one other thing," he said. "Yes, I am asking you to tell me when you are ready, and only when you are ready, whether anyone is coming up this mountain to hurt you. Not today, not at this table. When you are ready, Because if someone is coming, I would like the time to prepare the ground. That is all. Emmeline looked at him. She looked at Barnaby, who was watching her with those quiet amber eyes. She looked at Elijah, who was trying very hard to look as if he were not watching her. She thought of a parlor rug in Boston. She thought of a silver cane. She thought of 47 names in a ledger written in her father's hand. "Mr. Thorne," she said. "Yes, miss. There is someone coming. I do not know when. I do not know how many, but there is someone coming." Silas nodded once. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That is enough for today." And he stood up and he took his coffee cup to the basin, and he did not ask her another question. The days that followed fell into a rhythm she had not known a life could have. Silas rose at 4:30. She knew because she heard the iron handle of the stove lift the soft clank of the lid, the slow build of the fire. By 5 he had coffee on. By 5:15 he was in the barn, and the soft sound of his boots crossing the yard, crunching in the new crust of snow, became the sound she came to wake by. Barnaby rose at 5. He went out before dawn every morning to check a trap line he had set along the edge of the timber. He came back at 7 with rabbits, or with marten, or sometimes with a brace of grouse hung from his belt. He did not speak at breakfast. He nodded. He ate. He listened. In the evenings, when the supper dishes were done and the fire was burning low, he would take a harmonica from the inside pocket of his coat, and he would play soft old tunes that Emmeline did not know by name, but knew in her body, the way a person knows a hymn she heard her mother sing before she could understand the words. Elijah rose at 5:30. He chopped wood. He watered the horses. He fed the 2 goats whose names he told her on the second morning with great seriousness were Pearl and Ruby, and who were the 2 finest dairy goats in the Colorado Territory, and anyone who disagreed could come up the mountain and fight him about it. Elijah was the one who talked. He talked about the weather and the horses, and a man named Ephraim Gaines, who had owned the general store in Timber Ridge back when the boys were growing up, and who had once, Elijah swore on his mother's grave, eaten an entire pie on a bet. He made her laugh on the 3rd morning, just once, a small, startled laugh that surprised her more than it surprised him, and he had the grace not to comment on it. By the 4th day she was cooking. She did not ask if she could. She simply got up on the morning of the 4th day, tied one of the clean aprons she had found folded in the pantry around the flannel shirt, and started making biscuits. Silas came in from the barn and stopped in the doorway. He looked at her at the counter with flour on her hands. He did not smile, but something in his eyes moved. "Miss Wells, Mr. Thorne, you do not have to." "I know, Mr. Thorne." He nodded slowly. "My mother," he said, "used to stand where you are standing, right at that counter. She made biscuits with buttermilk and a pinch of bacon grease in the flour. She would not tell a soul the pinch was in there, but we all knew. They were the best biscuits in the territory." Emmeline looked down at the bowl. "Your mother sounds like a woman I would have liked, Mr. Thorne." Silas was quiet a long moment. "She would have liked you too, Miss Wells," he said, and went to wash his hands. On the 7th day, she asked Elijah to show her the barn. She had a reason she did not fully admit, even to herself. She had spent 6 days inside a house that smelled of 4 strangers, and she wanted to stand in a room that did not. But the reason she gave Elijah was that she wanted to meet the horses. He grinned like she had handed him a birthday present. "Miss Wells, you have made my week." He walked her across to the yard. He named the horses as they came up to the rails. Midnight Silas's mare, 17 hands of black temper that gentled only for Silas and would not let any other man put a saddle on her. Ash Barnaby's gray gelding, quieter than Barnaby himself. Copper Elijah's chestnut, who nudged at his shoulder like a dog. Daisy, the old gray mule, who was 19 that winter, and had Elijah said earned her feed. Emmeline put her palm flat against Copper's neck. The horse did not flinch. She had not realized until that moment at how long it had been since she had touched a living thing that did not make her afraid. Elijah stood 2 paces off and watched her with a quiet she did not expect from him. "Miss Wells." Yes, whoever he was. She went very still. "I ain't asking," said Elijah. "I ain't asking a thing. I am just saying, whoever he was wrong. She could not speak for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "Thank you, Mr. Thorne." "Eli," he said. "The brothers call me Eli." "Thank you, Eli." He smiled a small smile and he turned away to give her her privacy, and he pretended to fuss with Copper's halter until he was sure she had stopped crying. That night at supper, she asked about the books. They had been on her mind. A homestead 40 miles from town run by three men who had not had a woman in the house in 9 years was not a place a person expected to find a worn volume of Shakespeare and a textbook on cabinet making and a leather-bound copy of Poor Richard's Almanac from 1867. Silas answered. "Our mother," he said. "She came up from Missouri with a crate of books in the wagon. Our father said she could only bring what she could carry herself from the wagon into the first cabin they built, and she carried that crate in one trip." He told that story every Christmas for 20 years. "Do you read from them?" Emmeline asked. Barnaby spoke. "Silas does," Barnaby said. Emmeline looked at Silas. Silas looked at his plate. "Some," he said, "not as well as I would like." "I could teach you," Emmeline said before she knew she was going to say it, "if you wanted." The silence at the table shifted. Barnaby lifted his head and looked at her. Elijah looked at Silas. Silas looked at his plate a moment longer. Then he looked at her. "I would be obliged, Miss Wells." That was all he said. But the next evening after supper, when the dishes were done and the fire was burning low, he brought the volume of Shakespeare down from the shelf and set it on the table between them, and she opened it to As You Like It, and by the end of the first hour, she understood that Silas Thorne could read perfectly well. He simply read slowly, and he had been alone with the words so long he had never heard anyone else speak them out loud. She read the first page to him. He listened with his head tilted, one hand wrapped around a cold coffee cup, and his amber eyes did not leave her face. She had not been looked at like that, she thought, in her entire life. She closed the book early that night because she did not know what to do with the way it made her feel. The next morning, Barnaby taught her how to read tracks. They walked out past the barn after breakfast into the new powder. He carried a walking stick, and he wore a heavy wool coat, and he pointed out the small, clean prints of a snowshoe hare and the larger double dot of a fox that had been hunting the hare, and the thing Emmeline would remember longest, the single clean plate-sized track of a mountain lion that had come within 20 yards of the house in the night. "Miss Wells," said Barnaby. "Yes." "A mountain will tell you who came through in the night if you know how to read her." She looked up at him. "You do not talk much, Mr. Thorne." Barnaby was quiet a moment. Then he said, "I talked enough for a lifetime in the summer of 1876, miss. I have been saving my words ever since." She did not ask him what he meant. But that night, sitting by the fire while Silas split logs in the yard and Elijah played a game of solitaire with a grimy deck, Barnaby began without being asked to tell her about the rosebud. He told her about the dust. He told her about the heat. He told her about a boy from Ohio who had slept beside him for 2 weeks and had taken an arrow through the throat on a morning he had been laughing about a letter from his sister. He told her about coming home to Colorado afterward and being unable to sleep in a building with four walls. He told her about the first night he had slept under a pine tree with a horse blanket and how the wind in the branches above him had sounded like a thing he could survive. "The pines healed me, miss," he said. "I did not know a thing could do that. But they did." Emmeline sat with her hands folded in her lap. "My father," she said, "after a long time used to read me the Psalms before bed. When I was very small, he said there were words in the book that had been waiting 2,000 years for the right person to need them, and that every now and again one of us would reach for one and find it fit our hand." Barnaby nodded slowly. "That is a fine thing for a father to have said, miss. He was a fine man, Mr. Thorne. Was. He was killed, Mr. Thorne, 3 weeks ago." The room went still. Elijah set down his cards. Silas stopped in the doorway with the armload of logs he had brought in for the night. No one spoke. Emmeline did not cry. She had cried twice already that week, and she had decided somewhere in her bones that she was not going to cry a third time in front of these three men whose steady kindness had begun to feel dangerous to her because she was beginning to believe it. His name was Theodore Hartwell, she said. He kept ledgers for a railway consortium in Boston. He found something in those ledgers he was not meant to find. He hid it. He sent it with me. And the men who killed him do not know yet that it is not with him anymore. But they will figure it out. And when they do, they will come. Silas crossed the room slowly. He set the logs by the hearth. He sat down across from her. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said, "Miss Hartwell." She looked up at him. He had used her name, her real name. And she realized with a small, clean shock that she had told him nothing, and he had known. "You knew," she whispered. "I knew there was a real name, miss. I did not know what it was." "When did you know?" Silas glanced at the fire. "The second morning," he said. "You left a handkerchief on the washstand in the front room. There were 2 letters embroidered in the corner. E.H. A woman named Emma Wells embroiders her handkerchiefs with E.W. I did not press you on it. A woman has her reasons." Emmeline laughed once, a small, broken laugh that surprised her. "Mr. Thorne," she said. "Yes, Miss Hartwell. You are a more careful man than I have given you credit for." He did not smile, but the corner of his mouth moved. "I try to be miss," he said. She looked at the 3 of them then. 3 quiet men in a warm room in the middle of a winter the outside world could not reach. 3 men who had in 9 days given her back a piece of something she had thought she would never hold again. She reached into the pocket of the apron she had taken to wearing, and she drew out the small brass key she had kept against her skin for 9 nights, and she laid it on the table between them. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "the satchel in my room, there is a ledger inside it. The ledger is the reason my father is dead. I have carried it since the night he was killed. I have not shown it to a living soul. If you would open it with me, I would like you to know what is inside. Because if the men I am running from come up this mountain, you deserve to know why." Silas looked at the key. He did not pick it up. "Miss Hartwell, yes, you do not have to show us a thing. Not tonight, not ever. What we do here does not change based on what is in that book. If men come up this mountain to hurt you, we will stand in front of you, whether we have read 1 page of that ledger or none. Do you hear me? I hear you, Mr. Thorne, but if you want us to read it, if it would ease you, then we will read it." She pushed the key across the table. "I want you to read it," she said. Silas looked at his brothers. Barnaby nodded once. Elijah nodded once. Silas picked up the key. The satchel had been sitting untouched on a shelf in her room since the night she had arrived. She went to get it. When she came back, she set it on the table, and she took the lamp and she moved it close, and the 4 of them sat down together in that circle of yellow light. She opened the buckle. She drew out the ledger. It was bound in plain black leather. The corners were worn. The spine had begun to crack from the 3 days she had held it against her chest on the train. Her father's hand had written across the front in the small, neat script she had grown up watching the words "Accounts Receivable, 1878 to 1886. She opened to the first page. The first page was a list of names. Silas read slowly. He read each name out loud because once he began, he understood what he was reading, and he did not want his brothers to miss a word. Amos Carraway, Medicine Bow, Wyoming. Refused to sell. Handled by fire, August 1879. 3 deaths. Josiah and Martha Clemens, Laramie County. Refused to sell. Handled by cattle stampede, October 1879. 2 deaths. Ephraim Lyle, Cheyenne. Refused to sell. Handled by hired men, November 1879. 1 death. He turned the page. The list went on. He turned another page. It went on. He turned the page a 3rd time and he stopped. He did not speak. Barnaby, looking over his shoulder, said Silas. Elijah on the other side said, "Silas, what is it?" Silas did not answer. Emmeline leaned forward. He was looking at an entry dated the 14th of September, 1878. The hand was her father's. The names written in the neat small script were 3. Elias Thorne, Ruth Thorne. Thorne Ridge Homestead, Colorado Territory. 640 acres. refused to sell, handled by Dr. Merrick, September 14th, 1878. Two adults deceased, three sons survive ages 26, 23, and 21. Land recovered via forged will through attorney Tolliver. Cost to company, $200 to Merrick, $500 to Tolliver. The room was so quiet she could hear the fire. Silas did not move. His hands resting flat on either side of the ledger did not shake. They had gone very still, the way his face had gone, the way the whole of him had gone. Barnaby stepped back from the table. Elijah stood up so fast his chair went over behind him. He walked 3 paces to the wall. He put his forehead against the pine logs. His shoulders moved once. No one said anything. Emmeline sat at the table with her hand over her mouth, and she understood as a cold, slow thing that began in her stomach and climbed upward what this page meant. Her father had written these words 9 years ago. Her father had been the accountant who had recorded the sum paid to the doctor who had poisoned the parents of the 3 men who had saved her life. She began to shake. "Mr. Thorne," she whispered. "Mr. Thorne, I am so sorry. I did not know. I did not know. I did not know." Silas did not look up from the page. "Miss Hartwell, yes, your father wrote this. Yes, in his own hand. Yes. Why did he keep it?" Emmeline swallowed. "I do not know, Mr. Thorne. He was a quiet man. He kept records. He believed that a man who did the books honestly was the last honest man standing in a crooked room. He must have kept them because he thought someone someday would need them." Silas closed the ledger. He rested one hand on the black leather. He looked at his brothers. Elijah had turned back from the wall. His face was wet. He did not wipe it. Barnaby was leaning against the hearth. His hand was flat against the stone. He was looking at the floor. Silas spoke. "Barn, Eli, our father was not taken by cholera." "No," said Barnaby, "he was not." "Our mother was not taken by cholera." "No," said Elijah, "she was not." "9 years," Silas said. "9 years," said Barnaby. Silas looked at Emmeline. "Miss Hartwell, yes. The men who killed your father, the men who are coming up this mountain, yes, are the same men who killed ours." Emmeline nodded. Her eyes did not leave his. "Yes, Mr. Thorne." Silas placed his palm flat on the ledger. "Then we are not 4, he said. "We are 4 with a debt that is 9 years old and still bearing interest. And when they come up this mountain, Miss Hartwell, they are not going to find what they think they are going to find." He looked at his brothers. "Barn, yes. Tomorrow morning you ride for Gold Hill. You go through Eagles Pass. You take the Sharps in the Colt in a bedroll for 3 days. You wire Denver. You wire the United States Marshal, a man named Wade Kingston. I have not spoken to him in 10 years, but he knew our father. You tell him we have the ledger. You tell him what is in it. You tell him where it is. And you come back." Barnaby nodded. "Eli, yes. You and I fortify. Snares, alarms, loopholes. We clear the fields of fire. We stock the cellar with water and powder. We pack the root cellar with food for a siege. We turn this house into a place that a man who comes up this mountain with bad intentions does not come down from." Elijah nodded. "Miss Hartwell, yes, Mr. Thorne. Tomorrow I am going to teach you to shoot." She looked at him across the lamplight. For the first time in 9 days, she saw the man she had glimpsed on the platform at Timber Ridge, the man who had taken off his coat in a killing wind and laid it on the ground in front of her, the man who had said, "I will not come any closer than I am right now." She saw the rest of him now, and she saw behind the grief that had come into his face in the last 10 minutes something older and harder that had lived in him all along. Something the grief had only uncovered. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," she said. Silas Thorne stood up from the table. He carried the ledger to the great stone hearth. He set it on the mantel above the fire in the exact center, in the place of honor, in the place where the Thorne family Bible had sat every day of his growing up. He placed his palm on the cover one last time. He looked at the fire. "Papa," he said softly. "Mama, we hear you." Outside, the wind had begun to rise again. Somewhere on the other side of the mountain, 40 miles below, and a world away, three riders were making slow progress up a road that the storm had not yet fully closed. And a man with a tin star was writing a telegram in careful block letters to a private car on a siding at the edge of Timber Ridge. And the telegram said only four words: "She is up there." The wind rose in the night, the way old grief rises slow at first. Then all at once, and by morning the second storm of that winter had laid another 20 inches of snow on Thorn Ridge. Silas was up before the fire had burned to embers. Emmeline heard him go. She heard the soft slide of the stove lid, the careful build of new kindling, the whisper of the draft as the flames caught hold. She heard his boots cross the kitchen floor. She heard the door open and the cold come in, and the door close behind him, and the snow crunch under his step as he went toward the barn. She lay in the dark for a long time with her eyes open. She thought of her father writing the name Elias Thorne in a ledger 9 years ago, not knowing he was writing a sentence that his daughter would one day read aloud at a kitchen table 40 miles into the Colorado mountains. She thought of Ruth Thorne, whom she had never met, standing at the kitchen counter she now used every morning, making biscuits with a pinch of bacon grease in the flour. She thought of three boys, ages 26 and 23 and 21, digging two graves behind a barn in the October of 1878 and making a promise. She thought of what it meant to have brought this particular debt to this particular door. She did not cry. She had passed the place where crying helped. She rose before dawn and she put on the flannel shirt and the wool trousers and a second pair of wool socks, and she went down to the kitchen and she started breakfast. When Silas came back in from the barn, she had coffee on the table and eggs in the skillet and a stack of fresh biscuits cooling on a clean cloth. He stopped in the doorway the way he had stopped on the fourth morning. "Miss Hartwell, Mr. Thorne, you did not have to." "Mr. Thorne," she said, and her voice was steadier than it had been in 9 days. "I know I do not have to. I am choosing to. There is a difference." He looked at her a long moment. Then he nodded and he took off his coat and he hung it on the peg and he sat down. They ate in a quiet that was not heavy. It was the quiet of four people who had been told the night before something that changed the shape of what they were doing, and who now were taking the morning to let that new shape settle into place. Barnaby ate quickly. When his plate was clean, he folded his napkin and he set it beside the plate and he stood up. "I will be gone 3 days, he said. Silas nodded. "Take the Sharps," Silas said. "Not the Remington. The Sharp shoots truer out past 200 yards and the cold does not bind the action. I will take the Sharps. The coat, the heavy one. I have it. The compass. Papa's compass." Barnaby reached into his vest pocket and drew out a small brass compass on a chain. He held it up. "It is with me, Silas." Silas nodded again. Eli packed the saddlebags. Silas went to the door. He rested one hand on the doorframe. He looked out at the snow and the pale gray sky and the line of pines that stood between Thorn Ridge and the world. "Barn. Yes, if you see a man on the road, any man, you do not talk to him. I will not, if the wire at Gold Hill is down. I ride to Silver Plume. If Silver Plume is down, I ride to Georgetown. Do not come back empty. I will not." Barnaby crossed the room. He put his hand on Elijah's shoulder. Elijah gripped his wrist. He put his hand on Silas's shoulder. Silas gripped his. He stopped in front of Emmeline. "Miss Hartwell, Mr. Thorne, a thing my father used to say?" "Yes, winter always ends." She held his amber eyes. "Winter always ends," she said. Barnaby nodded once. He picked up his rifle. He walked out into the snow. 10 minutes later, she heard the soft sound of ash at a slow walk going out past the barn, and then that sound faded, and then it was gone, and then Thorn Ridge was a house of three, and the work began. Silas led her out to the yard at 9 that morning. He wore the heavy bison hide coat. She wore a wool coat Elijah had fetched down from a cedar chest in the loft. A coat that had belonged to Ruth Thorne, a coat that had not been worn by a living person in 9 years. It fit Emmeline almost perfectly. She did not let herself think about that. In Silas's hands was the Winchester. It was a rifle she had seen mounted above the hearth since her first morning in the house. It was a Winchester 1873 lever, action chambered in 4440, the gun a man in high country carried when he did not intend to come home without meat. The stock was walnut dark with the oil of 20 years of hands. The blued steel of the barrel was spotless. Silas stood her in the yard with her back to the barn, and he held the rifle out to her across both palms. Miss Hartwell. Yes. Before I put this in your hand, I want you to hear me on a few things. All right, this gun is not a toy. You already know that. I am not going to lecture you about what a gun is. I am going to tell you what this particular gun is. It is the rifle my father taught me to shoot with when I was 11 years old. It has been in this family 22 years. It has killed deer and elk and 2 mountain lions and 1 bear. It has never been aimed at a man. I would like that last thing to stay true. I understand, she said. He placed the rifle in her hands. It was heavier than she expected. Her first instinct was to compensate with her wrist. He stopped her. He guided her left hand to the forestock, her right hand to the wrist of the stock. You bring it up like this, Miss Hartwell. You seat it here, high on your shoulder, tight against the bone. You do not hold it in the meat of your arm. The meat will bruise, the bone will not. He stepped behind her. He did not touch her. He stood close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his coat. He raised his own arms along the outside line of her arms, not touching, only showing her the angle. Your left elbow down and tucked, your right elbow out and level, your cheek down against the stock, your eye behind the sight, not above it, behind it. She did as he said. The world narrowed. She saw the front bead. She saw the rear notch. She saw beyond them a fence post he had driven into the snow at 30 paces, and on top of the fence post, a coffee tin dented and rusted at the rim. You breathe, he said. She breathed. You breathe all the way out, not all the way in. You let the air leave you. At the bottom of your breath, when you are empty, your body goes still. That is when you squeeze, not pull, squeeze. The trigger should surprise you. She let out her breath. She squeezed. The rifle kicked harder than she had braced for. The crack of the shot bounced back off the barn. The coffee tin stayed where it was. A piece of the fence post, 6 inches below it, splintered into the snow. Low, he said. Not bad. You pulled your cheek up at the last. Try again. He worked the lever for her the first time. Brass spun in the snow. She chambered the next round herself. She shot 8 times that first morning. On the 7th shot, she hit the coffee tin. It spun off the post and went into the snow and stayed there silver side up, glinting in the sun. She lowered the rifle. She turned. Silas Thorne was standing 3 paces back with his arms folded across his chest. He did not smile, but the corner of his mouth did what it did. Miss Hartwell, yes, that was a fine shot. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. He stepped forward. He took the rifle from her carefully. He slid open the loading gate. He thumbed the last 2 rounds out of the magazine and set them in her palm. You hold those, he said. Tomorrow we go to 50 paces. The day after we go to the post at 70. Within a few days you will put a round through the eye of a man at 100 paces if you have to. She looked at the brass in her hand. Mr. Thorne. Yes. I hope I do not have to. He looked at her for a long moment. So do I, Miss Hartwell, he said. So do I. That afternoon, Elijah showed her the house the way a soldier shows a position. He took her from room to room. He pointed out the loopholes his father had cut in the shutters 20 years ago. Small square holes that could be latched open from the inside. He showed her the iron bars his father had made in the forge behind the smokehouse bars that could be slid into brackets on either side of the front and back doors so that no single man with a shoulder and a determination would come through. He showed her the ladder to the loft and the trapdoor at the top of the ladder and the small square opening in the gable above the loft, from which a man with a rifle could see the road and the tree line and the near edge of the barn all at once. Pub built all this house for weather, Elijah said. Then he added with a quiet she did not hear from him often, but he built it for more than weather too. He was a careful man, our pa. He was, she said. He laid out for her where she would be if riders came. Her place was the south window of the kitchen, which had the loophole and the clear sight line to the road, and which was more importantly the window farthest from the front door. She would not be in the line of the door. She would be to the side of it in the angle where men coming through a door tend not to look first. You will have the Winchester, Elijah said. You will have a boss of 4440 at your feet. You will have a pitcher of water on the sill. You will not speak. You will not call out. You will not open the shutter until we call the word. What is the word, she asked. Columbine. She looked at him. Pa named this ridge after Ma's favorite flower, Elijah said. The columbines come up on the south slope in May. If any man among us calls that word, it is because the thing we have been waiting for has become the thing we are inside of. Not before, not for any other reason. She nodded. Columbine, she said. Columbine, he said. They worked through that afternoon and the next day and the next. Silas and Elijah set snares in the tree line the way a man sets snares for a cougar he knows is coming. They strung wires through the dry brush below the ridge that would not trip a man, but would spill a tin can down a stone so that anyone inside the house would hear it from 200 yards. They shoveled a firing lane from the front porch out into the clearing, a clean path of packed snow 60 yards long, with stumps marking distance at 20 and 40 and 60. They packed the root cellar with barrels of water and salt pork and cornmeal and lamp oil. They laid sandbags along the inside of the front windows, the way Barnaby had been taught to lay sandbags in 1876. Emmeline worked beside them. She carried sand. She filled the bags. She stacked them. She ran the shot tower on the kitchen table, casting fresh balls from a bar of lead Silas melted in a small iron pot over the stove. She cooked 3 meals a day. She swept the floors at night. She read to Silas from the Shakespeare for half an hour each evening by lamplight, and they worked their way through As You Like It and began on 12th night. And one night he laughed just once at Fest to the Fool, a short, rough laugh that surprised him more than it surprised her. On the 4th morning after Barnaby rode out, she took the rifle to 100 paces, and she put a round through the dented coffee tin on the first shot. Silas was standing at the porch rail, and when the tin spun in the sun, he did not say a word. He only walked down to her in the snow, and he took off his glove, and he shook her hand. Miss Hartwell, Mr. Thorne, you are a shooter. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Her hand stayed in his 1 beat longer than the handshake required. Neither of them looked away. He let go first. He had to. On the 5th morning after Barnaby rode out, Emmeline carried a basket of laundry to the line Elijah had strung along the south wall of the house. The day was bright, the wind was down. The temperature had risen just enough that water in a kettle would stay liquid for 10 minutes before skimming over. She was pinning a shirt to the line when the wind picked a second shirt out of the basket and carried it across the yard. Silas was crossing from the woodyard to the porch with an armload of split pine. The shirt flew into his chest. He caught it without dropping the wood. He walked back to her with it in one hand, his left arm still loaded, and he held the shirt out to her, and his glove was off, and her hand was bare. Their fingers touched. Not by accident, not exactly. The shirt was in the middle, but the transfer was a small, slow thing, and at the end of it, his bare hand brushed hers, and she did not pull away, and he did not pull away. And for 2 or 3 heartbeats in the cold sunlight of a January morning, on a homestead in the Colorado Territory, Silas Thorne and Emmeline Hartwell stood 4 feet apart in the snow and forgot what they were doing. He remembered first. Miss Hartwell, she blinked. My apologies. Mr. Thorne, nothing to apologize for. He walked past her. He went up the porch steps. He set the wood by the door. He went back to the yard without looking at her again. She stood at the line with the shirt in her hand, and she realized her heart was beating harder than it had been when she had fired the rifle at 100 paces. That night, for the first time since she had come into the house, she did not bolt the bedroom door. She did not know what that meant. She thought maybe he would know. Barnaby came back in on the morning of the seventh day. They saw him from the gable window first. Elijah saw him. Elijah called down, Silas. Silas was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stripped-down colt in pieces on a clean cloth. Yes, rider coming up. It is Barn. Silas stood. Emmeline stood. They went to the porch. Barnaby rode into the yard slow. Ash was blown. His flanks were gray with sweat that had frozen and thawed and frozen again. Barnaby himself looked 10 years older than the man who had ridden out a week before. His coat was white at the shoulders from a night or two in the open. His hat brim bent his face gray with cold. Silas went down to meet him. He put his hand on Barnaby's boot in the stirrup. Barnaby looked down at his brother. I got through to Denver. Silas nodded. It took me 4 days longer than I planned, Barnaby said. Ash slowed me down coming back. Silas nodded. Kingston has it. Silas nodded again. He is coming with 30 men. Silas nodded a third time. There was a pause and said Barnaby, yes, they know she is up here. Silas's hand on Barnaby's boot tightened. How? Gold Hill wire clerk. I did not see him clean before I sent. He saw the signature. He sold it to a man who was waiting. By now Crow knows. By now Blackwood knows. Silas looked at his brother's leg. The dark stain on the wool trousers ran from hip to knee. Barn, how did you get that? Barnaby closed his eyes a moment before he answered. 2 days out from Gold Hill. I came around a bend in the pass, and there were 2 of them waiting. One in the rocks above, one in the trail. The one above took the first shot. He put a round across Ash's shoulder, not clean through, but Ash went down on his knees and came up again. The one in the trail was a slower man than he thought he was. I killed him with the sharps. I put 2 rounds into the rocks where the other one was, and when he stopped firing, I did not wait to see if he was dead. I rode. How bad is Ash? Ash will mend. The cold helped. The cold kept the bleeding down. How bad are you, Barn? I rode 40 miles on it. That is how bad. Did you see them again? I saw 4 other riders coming up the South Road as I was coming off Eagles Pass. Different men. They were moving slow. I got around them. But they are moving. They will be in Timber Ridge tonight. They will be at the Chain Bridge by tomorrow morning. They will be at the foot of this ridge by tomorrow noon. Silas looked up at his brother. Get down, Barn. Barnaby got down. Silas caught him under the arms as his legs went. Elijah came down off the porch at a run. They got him inside. They got the coat off him. Emmeline had water on the stove before the door closed behind them. She had the kettle off in a basin of warm water and a cloth, and she had cut the crusted blood away from a long, shallow wound along the outside of Barnaby's thigh that he had not even mentioned. He had ridden the last 40 miles with it. He had ridden the last 40 miles with an inch of black ice inside his boot. Miss Hartwell, he said when she pulled the second sock off his foot. Yes, I will not apologize for the smell. You will not need to, Mr. Thorne. He smiled a tired half smile, and then his eyes closed, and Silas and Elijah got him to the cot by the fire, and Emmeline got to work. She worked with her father's hands. Theodore Hartwell had served as a volunteer orderly in the last months of the war between the states. Before Emmeline was born, and when she was a child, he had taught her. Because he taught her everything. The small, careful work of cleaning a wound, of packing it with clean lint, of recognizing the gray-green tinge in the edge of a cut that meant a man would be dead by Thursday if someone did not open the wound and clean it again. She cleaned Barnaby's leg. She packed the wound. She bound it with strips of an old cotton sheet that Elijah tore without being asked. When she stood up from the cot, there was dried blood to her wrists. Silas handed her a clean cloth. Miss Hartwell, Mr. Thorne, where did you learn to do that? My father. Silas looked at her for a long moment. A thing moved across his face that she did not fully recognize. Your father, he said, taught you a great deal. He did, Mr. Thorne. And in the room between them, in the silence that followed, Theodore Hartwell sat down quietly for a moment beside his daughter, and neither Silas nor Emmeline said his name out loud, but he was there. Then Silas turned. He looked at Elijah. Eli. Yes, they will be at the foot of the ridge by noon tomorrow. Yes. Silas walked to the mantel. He took the black ledger from the place of honor. He placed it on the kitchen table. He rested his palm on the cover. Miss Hartwell, yes. There is a thing I should have asked you to do before now. I did not ask because we had the time. Now we do not have the time. What is it? He looked at her. This ledger is evidence. If they take it back, they win. If it burns, they win. If it leaves this house with us and something happens on the trail, they win. There is one way they do not win. What way? We copy it. She blinked. He went to a chest behind the kitchen bench. He opened it. He drew out a second black leather book, unused, the twin of the one on the table. He set it beside the ledger. Pa used to buy them in pairs from a traveler out of Denver, he said. One for the work, one spare. He never used the spare. It has been in that chest 8 years. She looked at the two books, the plain one, the one filled with her father's hand. Tonight, said Silas, you and I, by the fire. You read, I write. Eli sits by barn and keeps the coffee hot. By morning we will have two books that say the same thing, and we will put one in a place the railway will never find, and we will let them come for the other. She looked up at him. Mr. Thorne, yes, your hand, can you write a fair ledger? My mother taught me, he said. She said a man should be able to write a hand a woman could read in the dark. I never tested the claim. Tonight we will. Emmeline laughed once, a short laugh, the second one she had given in that house. All right, she said. They worked through the night. She read her father's small, neat script aloud by lamplight. Silas sat across from her at the table with a steel nib and a stoneware inkwell, and he wrote in a hand that was nothing like her father's, a hand that was larger, plainer, square and carpenterly, the hand of a man who had kept his own books for 9 years because there had been no one else to keep them. He wrote fast. He did not make a single mistake. When she read out the entry for Elias Thorne and Ruth Thorne, she paused. She looked up at him over the lamp. He did not look up from the page. Keep reading, Miss Hartwell. She kept reading. When he wrote the names of his mother and father onto the page of the second book, his hand did not shake. He wrote them the way he had built the house. Clean, square, to last. The fire was low. Barnaby was asleep on the cot. Elijah had fallen asleep on the rug beside him with one hand on his brother's wrist. The storm outside had finally fully eased. The moon had come out and was laying long blue squares of light across the kitchen floor. They finished at 4 in the morning. Silas blotted the last page. He closed the second book. He set it beside the first. 2 identical black leather volumes indistinguishable in the lamplight. He looked at her across the table. Miss Hartwell. Yes, Mr. Thorne. I am going to do something now that I will ask your permission for first. All right. He pushed the second ledger across the table toward her. I want you to hide this one, he said. You. Not me. Not Elijah. Not Barnaby. You. Because if something happens tomorrow and I have to stand in front of a man with a gun and swear I do not know where that book is, I do not want to be lying. I want to tell him the truth. I want to tell him that only you know. And I want him to have to come through me to ask. She looked at the book. She looked at him. Mr. Thorne, yes. If they come through you and they come through Elijah and they come through Barnaby and they come through me, the book will never reach Denver. He looked at the fire. Then let us make sure they do not come through all 4 of us, Miss Hartwell. She reached across the table. She took the book. She stood up. She walked to the back of the house, to the pantry, to the small corner at the back of the pantry, where a wedge of loose floorboard had caught her eye a week ago when she had been putting away sacks of flour. She lifted the board. Beneath it was a dry hollow in the sill, a place that had probably once held a wedding ring, or a letter or a child's tooth, she did not know which. She set the second ledger in the hollow. She set the board back. She set a sack of flour over the board. She stood up. When she came back to the kitchen, Silas was standing at the window with his hands flat on the sill, looking out at the moonlight on the snow. She came and stood beside him. She did not say anything for a long moment. Mr. Thorne. Yes, When we spoke on the first morning, you said there was one thing you needed to ask me. Yes. And when we spoke the night we opened the ledger, you said there were no more questions between us. Yes, I am going to ask you one now. Ask it. If we live through tomorrow, if a United States Marshal comes up this mountain with 30 men and finds us all still breathing and takes Augustus Blackwood away in irons. If spring comes and the pass opens and the Columbines come up on the south slope, yes. What then, Mr. Thorne? He was quiet a long time. Then he said very softly, Miss Hartwell, I am a man who lost a wife 9 years ago, and I swore to myself I would not lose another. I have spent 9 years keeping that promise by not making it again. I did not know when I walked onto that platform that I was about to break it. She did not speak. He turned his head. He looked at her. The moonlight was on the side of his face. Miss Hartwell, yes, if we live through tomorrow, and if spring comes, and if the Columbines come up, yes, I would like to build you a house. She looked at him. A small one, he said, down the ridge from this one, south-facing, 2 rooms to start, walls 8 inches thick, a stone hearth, porch looking out over the valley. I would like to build it myself with my brothers if they will help. I would like to put the first nail in on the morning the last of the snow goes off the ground. I would like it to be yours, Miss Hartwell, whether or not you ever say a word to me that I do not already know. She could not speak. He turned back to the window. That is all he said. She stood beside him. Outside, the moon had begun to sink behind the far peaks, and somewhere in the black line of the pines, a lone owl called and was answered and was silent. Mr. Thorne. Yes, Silas. He did not turn his head, but she saw him close his eyes. Yes. South-facing, she said. South-facing. With a window in the kitchen that gets the morning sun. Any window you ask for, Miss Hartwell. 2 more rooms eventually. As many as you ask for. A stone hearth tall enough that a tall man does not have to stoop. She heard him breathe out. You will have to describe that tall man to me, he said, so I know how tall to build it. She turned her face to him. He turned his face to her. They were very close. Outside, the owl called a third time and was answered a third time, and the wind in the pines shifted, and somewhere down the mountain 40 miles below them, in a private car on a siding at the edge of Timber Ridge, a man named Hollis Blackwood was rolling the dice of the next day across a green felt table, and a man with a tin star was lighting a cheroot with a steady hand, and another snow was beginning to fall. Silas Thorne bent his head. He kissed her once, just once. It tasted of coffee and cold air, and something she had not tasted before and could not have named if asked, the taste of a promise made in a house that had already paid for the promise with 9 years of silence. When he lifted his head, she kept her eyes closed a moment longer. Then she opened them. Mr. Thorne, yes, if you die tomorrow, yes, I will never forgive you. He almost smiled. His mouth did the thing it did. Then I will not die tomorrow, Miss Hartwell, he said. Silas, she said. Silas, he said. He touched her cheek once with the back of his hand. Then he stepped away. He went to the cot and he covered his brother with a second blanket. He went to the loft ladder and he told Elijah without waking him to come up and sleep in a real bed for what was left of the night. Elijah rose from the rug like a sleepwalker and climbed the ladder and was gone. Silas came back to Emmeline. Get some rest, Miss Hartwell. You will not. I will rest tomorrow night when this is over. She nodded. She went to her room. She laid down in the flannel shirt and the wool trousers because she was not going to sleep out of her clothes on a night like this one. And she listened through the wall to the slow, quiet sound of Silas Thorne building up the fire for the last few hours before dawn. Somewhere in that listening she slept. And somewhere in that sleep, far below, on the mountain road, lanterns came on in a private rail car, and in the dark, men were saddling horses, the 4 who had ridden up the south road with Sheriff Crow that afternoon, and 7 more who had come in on the private car with Hollis Blackwood, himself in a column that had been waiting 9 years to come up. Thorn Ridge began at last to move. Morning came to Thorn Ridge the way morning came to a man about to hang. There was no dawn. There was only a slow, gray lifting of the dark, a change in the weight of the air, a shift from night that could not be seen but could be felt in the bone. The snow had fallen all night. By 7, there were 9 fresh inches on the ground, soft and silent, and the world beyond the porch was a blank white page with a line of black pines written across the far edge of it. Silas had not slept. He had built the fire up at 5. He had made coffee at 5:15. He had walked to Emmeline's door at 6 and listened to her breathing through the wood and had not knocked. He had gone to the cot by the fire at 6:10 and had looked down at his middle brother, pale and still, and had laid 2 fingers against Barnaby's throat and had felt the pulse, slow and tired but steady, and had nodded once to himself. At 6:30 he woke Elijah. Eli. The youngest opened his eyes at once. He had learned in 9 years of living with a brother who did not sleep to come awake and all the way in a single breath. "They are 2 hours out," Silas said. Elijah sat up. They got dressed in the loft. They came down the ladder one at a time. They moved through the house the way men move through a church, quiet and purposeful, touching nothing that did not need to be touched. At 7, Emmeline opened her door. She was fully dressed. The flannel shirt was clean. The wool trousers were tucked into her boots. She had braided her hair tight against her head and pinned it so that nothing could catch it if a hand reached for it. She had washed her face. Her cornflower eyes were clear and dry. Silas looked at her across the room. She looked back. "Miss Hartwell, Mr. Thorne. Are you ready?" "I am," he nodded once. She crossed the room. She took her place at the south window of the kitchen. The Winchester was already there, resting across the sandbags she had helped stack the day before. The box of 44-40 was at her feet. The pitcher of water was on the sill. A second rifle, a heavy Springfield that had belonged to Elias Thorne, leaned against the wall within her reach if the Winchester ran dry. She laid her hand on the stock of the Winchester. She did not tremble. Silas watched her for one breath. Then he turned to his youngest brother. "Eli. Loft." "Yes. Barnes stays on the cot. He has the Colt. If anything comes through that back door, the Colt will be the answer. If he wakes you, tell him to lie still. His leg will open if he stands on it. Do you hear me?" "I hear you. I am on the porch, Silas." "Yes." Barnaby's voice was thin. The middle brother had opened his eyes. He was looking up from the cot with the eyes of a man who had slept 2 hours in 7 days and knew exactly where he was. Silas crossed to him. "Barn, rest. I can shoot from a cot, brother. I can shoot from my back if it comes to it. Put the Springfield beside me, too." Silas looked at him a long moment. Then he nodded. He moved the Springfield from the wall to the floor beside the cot. He laid the Colt Peacemaker on Barnaby's chest. "Cover the back door," he said. "I will cover the back door." Silas turned and walked to the front of the house. He took the big bison hide coat off the peg. He buttoned it to his throat. He pulled on his hat. He picked up his Winchester from the table where he had cleaned it during the night. He stopped at the door. He looked back. 3 people in the room were looking at him. Barnaby on the cot with the Colt on his chest. Elijah halfway up the loft ladder with his rifle across his shoulders. Emmeline at the south window with her hand on the Winchester and the morning light on her honey hair. Silas Thorne took one full breath. Then he opened the door and he walked out into the cold. He did not stand on the porch. A man on a porch was a target. He crossed the firing lane they had shoveled the day before the 60 yards of packed snow, with the stumps marking 20 and 40 and 60. He went past the last stump. He went to the edge of the tree line to a place behind a thick spruce where he had dug the previous afternoon a shallow pit in the snow with his shovel. He had lined the pit with pine boughs to keep his body off the cold ground. He laid down in the pit. He brought the Winchester up beside him. He pulled the bison hide coat around him so that only his eyes and the barrel of the rifle were above the white line. He became part of the mountain. He waited. At 9:22, he heard the tin can. It was a small, bright sound, the sound of a single tin can filled with stones rolling from a shelf of rock. down into a crevice, tripped by a wire strung at the ankle of a man who had just stepped onto the property of the Thorne brothers. Silas did not move. He counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He counted 11 separate small sounds over the next 6 minutes. Boot in snow, horse breath, metal on leather. A low voice, 11 men, exactly 11. He smiled once without pleasure inside his coat. Then he watched them come. They came up the road in a rough column, 4 in front, 3 in the middle, 4 at the rear. They rode slowly because the snow was deep, and because they did not know the land, and because any man who has ever walked into another man's front yard in winter, with rifles in his saddle scabbards, knows enough to walk slow. The man in front was Sheriff Obadiah Crow. The man behind him on a gray horse with a heavy winter blanket over the saddle was Hollis Blackwood. Hollis was wearing a fine sheepskin coat that had never been worn on this mountain. His hat was new. His boots were city boots. His face under the hat was the face Emmeline had seen 3 weeks before in a parlor on Beacon Hill. Silas did not shoot him, not yet. Silas let them come to the last stump, the 60-yard stump, the one he had marked with an X cut into the wood. Crow stopped there. The column stopped behind him. Crow cupped his hands. He had a big voice. He had used it to announce himself in Timber Ridge for 11 years. Thorne, he bellowed. The house was silent. Silas Thorne, Crow called. "This is Sheriff Obadiah Crow of Timber Ridge. I have a warrant for a woman named Emmeline Hartwell wanted in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for murder and theft. I have reason to believe you are harboring her. You have 2 minutes to send her out before I come in after her." The house did not answer. Crow waited. He looked back at Hollis. Hollis nodded once. Crow turned back to the house. He raised his voice again. He said the same words a second time louder. He gave the house 2 more minutes. The house did not answer. 11 rifles came up out of 11 saddle scabbards. That was the moment Silas shot the sheriff of Timber Ridge. The crack of the Winchester rolled off the mountain and bounced back twice before it died. Obadiah Crow came out of the saddle sideways and hit the snow with his arms out, like a man who had been surprised by bad news and would not be getting up to argue about it. The column came apart. Some men spurred forward. Some men spun their horses and fired into the tree line at random. One man, the second man behind Crow, went down from the loft window where Elijah had been waiting for the first sound of the Winchester. Another man trying to ride around the west side of the house hit a bear trap Silas had set in the snow the previous afternoon and went out of his saddle screaming. Hollis Blackwood wheeled his gray horse and drove for the trees to the south. Silas let him go. Silas was working. He was working the way a man who had built a house with his own hands and had seen that house threaten works. He was working the way his father had taught him to work a long time ago on a different kind of day. He fired. He levered. He fired. He levered. Each round was a decision. Each shot went where it was sent. From the loft above the house, Elijah was doing the same. From the cot by the fire, Barnaby was firing the Colt out through the rifle port that covered the back door because 2 of the 11 had tried in the first minute of the fight to come around the back of the house, and neither one of them made the back porch. From the south window of the kitchen, Emmeline Hartwell was firing the Winchester calm as an accountant, her breath going all the way out before each squeezed the trigger, surprising her every time. It was over in 4 minutes. Of the 11 men who had ridden up Thorne Ridge that morning, 8 were dead or dying in the snow. One had broken his leg in a trap and was sitting in a red hole weeping. One, a young man, had thrown down his rifle and put his hands over his head and was kneeling by his dropped reins. One, Hollis Blackwood, had ridden south through the trees and was gone. Silas rose from the pit. He walked down into the firing lane. He did not walk among the bodies. He did not look at them. He walked to the center of the clearing, and he stood there, and he waited until Elijah came down from the loft and Emmeline came out from the kitchen door, the Winchester hot in her hands. Silas looked at the 2 of them. "Columbine," he said. Columbine said Elijah. Columbine said Emmeline. It was the signal that the house was safe. Then Silas looked down at the snow where Obadiah Crow had fallen, and he said very quietly, so that only the three people who had loved him for 9 years could hear Papa. Mama, 1. Inside the house, Barnaby was on his feet. He should not have been on his feet. Emmeline turned from the window and ran to him and got him back to the cot, and his face was the color of the wall, and she was pressing her hands against the wound through the bandage, and her hands were coming away dark. Mr. Thorne, she said. Barn, you swore I did not stand up, he whispered. I sat up. A man can sit up. You are bleeding through. I am breathing. That is what matters. Silas came in and saw his brother, and his face did a thing Emmeline had not seen it do before. Barn, Silas, Barn, you fool. Silas, listen. What? The younger brother, that was Hollis, I know. He rode south, I know. He is going back to his brother. I know, Barnaby closed his eyes. You have to stop him, Silas. Silas looked at his brother on the cot. He looked at Emmeline with the blood on her hands. He looked at Elijah in the doorway, still holding his rifle. He looked at the clock on the mantel. It was 9:38. At 2 in the afternoon, Augustus Blackwood was due on the noon train out of Denver. He would come up the northbound line. He would stop at Timber Ridge. He would take the siding that held his private car. And when his brother Hollis arrived there on a lathered gray horse, with the news that 8 of his 11 men were dead in the snow, and that the woman and the ledger were both still alive on Thorn Ridge, Augustus Blackwood would not get back on his train. He would stay. He would send for more men, 10 men, 20, however many he needed, and the mountain would not end then. Silas looked at Emmeline. Miss Hartwell, yes, I have to go down. She went still. How far, she said. 40 miles. In this. She looked at Barnaby on the cot. She looked at Elijah. She looked back at Silas. You will not make it in time alone, she said. You will not catch Hollis on a rested horse with Midnight, who has been standing in a barn for a week. You will not reach the chain bridge before him. And if Augustus arrives and is told about the ledger before the marshal arrives, he will have the telegraph line from Timber Ridge to Denver cut before noon, and Kingston will come up the mountain into a town that has been turned against him. Silas stared at her. You have thought about this. I have been thinking about it since I stopped shaking Mr. Thorne. What are you proposing? Emmeline Hartwell walked to the mantel. She took down the black ledger, the original, the one in her father's hand, and she set it on the table. She laid her palm flat on the cover the way Silas had done 9 days before. Then she said, Mr. Thorne, Hollis Blackwood wants 2 things on this mountain. He wants me, and he wants this book. He does not want the 3 Thorne brothers. He has never wanted the 3 Thorne brothers. They were to him a piece of business his brother did 9 years ago, and he has forgotten them as completely as a man forgets a meal he ate in 1878. Silas watched her. If I ride south, she said, if I ride south now with this book, if I reach the chain bridge before Hollis reaches the private car, if I stand in front of Augustus Blackwood himself at Timber Ridge Station with this book in my hand and tell him I will give him the book and the woman both in exchange for the safety of this house. No, said Silas. He will not get on the train, Silas. He will stay to take delivery, and when he does, Marshal Kingston will ride into Timber Ridge at 2 in the afternoon and find him waiting on the siding with the evidence in his lap. No, Silas said again. It has to be me, Silas. He will not get off the train for anyone else. Not for Hollis. Not for you. Only for the book, and only from the hand of the woman he sent his brother to kill. I will not let you. You have to let me, because there is no one else. They stared at each other across the table. Barnaby on the cot spoke without opening his eyes. Silas, what? She is right, Barn. She is right, brother, and you know it. And every minute you spend arguing with her, Hollis rides another mile closer to Timber Ridge. Silas closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked at Elijah. Eli, saddle Copper for her. Saddle Midnight for me. I am going with her to the chain bridge. From there, she goes south alone, and I ride for Crow's dead deputies at the bottom of the road to collect their wire cutters. Because if Augustus has already had the line cut, I am going to put it back together before Kingston comes up. Elijah was already moving. Silas looked at Emily. Miss Hartwell, yes. If you do this, if you walk into that rail car, yes. I will come in behind you. I will not be 30 seconds behind you. Do you hear me? You stand in front of him. You give him the book. You keep him talking. You keep him looking at your face. And I will come in through the back of that car with the marshal behind me. Do you hear me, Dow? I hear you. Do not die before I get there. I will not. She put the ledger back into her leather satchel. She buckled the satchel to her belt. She went to the pantry. She lifted the loose floorboard. She took out the second ledger to copy the one Silas had written in the hand his mother had taught him. She brought it back to the kitchen. She laid it on the table. Mr. Thorne, she said, if the plan works, if I live, if you live, this one is for the marshal and I will carry it and hand it to him myself. And if the plan does not work. Emmeline looked at Barnaby on the cot. She looked at Elijah coming in from the barn. She looked at Silas. If the plan does not work, Mr. Thorne, she said quietly, Elijah knows where the copy is. Elijah will carry it to Denver. Elijah will finish what my father started and your father paid for. Elijah stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. Then he nodded once. Columbine, he said. Columbine, she answered. They rode south at 10 in the morning. Silas and Emmeline on Midnight in Copper. Down the ridge along the wagon road that was slowly being beaten into a path by the dead men's horses that had scattered back down the mountain. They rode hard. Midnight was a horse that could run through 6 inches of fresh snow without breaking stride, and Copper had been rested for a week and was fat with oats, and the 2 horses ate the miles. At the 10-mile marker, they found the first body. It was a man Silas did not recognize, a hired man. His horse had thrown him when a rabbit crossed the trail. His neck was broken. He had been dead about an hour. They rode past him. At the 20-mile marker, they came to the chain bridge. The chain bridge was a suspension span over the Eagle River Gorge. It had been built in 1872 by the same firm that had laid the first narrow gauge up the mountain. The planks were old. The chains were good. A man could cross it at a trot in good weather, but in winter it iced, and in winter a man walked his horse. Silas pulled up. Miss Hartwell, yes, here is where we part. She looked at him. 20 more miles, Silas said. The road bends east at the creek and then straightens out along the track. You will see Timber Ridge by 1:30. The private car will be on the siding at the east end of the station, the one the railway built for Augustus 3 years ago. She nodded. I will be behind you, Silas said. I am going to ride down the service road and cut the wire if it has been cut. I will meet the marshal at the chain bridge on his way up, and I will bring him into town from the back. You go in through the front. You go in alone. You keep Augustus in that car. She nodded again. Emmeline, yes, he said her first name for the first time. She turned her head. If I am late, he said, you run. Do you hear me? If you hear trouble behind you in the car, you do not stand your ground. You run out the side door. You run for the hills. You do not fight him alone. I will not fight him alone. Promise me. I promise you. Silas looked at her. Then he reached across the gap between their horses, and he took her cold hand in his cold hand, and he pressed it once hard, and he let go. Go, he said. She went. Copper took the chain bridge at a fast walk. Silas watched her cross. Silas watched her clear the far side. Silas watched her spur Copper into a trot on the far road, and her honey hair was a small, bright thing in the gray afternoon, and then the trees closed around her, and she was gone. Silas wheeled Midnight. He rode east along the service road. He did not look back. At 1:40 in the afternoon, a small woman on a chestnut horse rode into the town of Timber Ridge, Colorado from the North Road. The town was quiet. The storm had pushed most of its people indoors. Chimney smoke rose straight up from a dozen roofs. A stray dog crossed the street ahead of her and did not look back. She rode past the general store. She rode past the telegraph office where the door was open and the operator was nowhere to be seen. She rode past the hitching rail where 3 weeks before, the Thorne brothers had tied their horses on a January morning. At the east end of the station, she saw it, the private car. It sat on a short siding 100 yards beyond the main platform. It was a Pullman of the finest grade dark green with gold trim with a small iron platform at each end and curtains drawn across every window. A coal stove chimney rose from the roof. A thin line of smoke came out of it. A man in a railway conductor's uniform stood on the front platform with a short scattergun across his arms. Emmeline Hartwell dismounted. She tied Copper's reins to the station rail. She straightened her coat. She pulled her hat down. She lifted the leather satchel from the saddle and slung its strap over her shoulder. She touched once the cold shape of the paring knife she had carried through a wedding dress in 3 days of trains and 9 days of a mountain, and that she had kept still inside her left sleeve. Then she walked across the snow to the private car. The man with the scattergun saw her coming. He stiffened. She stopped 6 feet from the platform. She lifted her chin. "Tell Mr. Blackwood," she said in a voice that was steadier than she had any right to expect, "that Miss Emmeline Hartwell is here. Tell him she has brought the book." The man stared at her. Then he turned and he knocked twice on the door behind him and he went inside. 30 seconds later, the door opened. Augustus Blackwood stood in the doorway. He was a tall man of 55, thin and upright, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead and eyes the color of wet slate. He was dressed for the train. He wore a long black coat. His hands were bare and clean. He was holding a brandy glass. He looked down at Emmeline Hartwell in the snow. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had at last, after a long and tedious delay, been served the meal he had ordered. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "what a pleasure." He stepped aside. She climbed the iron platform. She ducked her head through the door. She stepped into the private car. The car was beautiful. That was the first thing she noticed. That this man who had ordered 47 people killed, who had paid $200 to poison a mountain woman in her own kitchen, who had sent his brother to beat her father to death in a parlor in Boston, lived in rooms of dark polished walnut and soft green velvet, and brass lamps that glowed on small round tables covered in white linen. The coal stove was burning steadily. There was a chessboard on a small table by one of the windows. The game was in progress. The White King was one move from being taken. Emmeline stood in the center of the car. Augustus closed the door behind her. He walked past her slowly without touching her, and he sat down in a green velvet chair. He set his brandy glass on a side table. He crossed one leg over the other. "Sit, Miss Hartwell." She did not sit. He smiled again. "Very well. Stand, you must be tired after such a journey. You came alone, I see. Where is my brother?" "I do not know where your brother is," Emmeline said. "That is unfortunate, for him I mean." Augustus reached into his vest pocket. He drew out a small gold watch. He looked at it. He put it back. "My train leaves at 3, he said. "That gives us a little over an hour. I find I am curious about you, Miss Hartwell. Your father was a quiet man. I expected you to be quiet too. And yet here you are, 40 miles from where you were supposed to be, with a book I paid a great deal of money to have returned to me." Emmeline lifted the satchel off her shoulder. She set it on a small table beside the chessboard. She opened the buckle. She drew out the ledger. She laid it on the table. Augustus's slate eyes flicked to the book. For the first time, something moved in his face. "Bring it to me," he said, and his voice had a fraction less of its earlier calm. Emmeline did not bring it to him. "Why," she said, "did you kill my father?" "Because he had that book." "Why did you kill the Thorne family?" "Because they had 640 acres that were in the way of a railroad." She nodded slowly. "And me," she said. "Why me?" Augustus laughed, a small dry laugh. "Because my brother Hollis is a romantic. He met you at a social event in Boston 18 months ago, and he decided he wanted you. He has a weakness for pretty girls with no money. I indulged him because it was cheaper than watching him spend his half of the firm on actresses. He was going to marry you. He was going to bring you to Denver. And then sometime in your second year of marriage, when it was quiet, he was going to make you a widow with no husband and no inheritance. And you would have lived a very comfortable life as a woman in a small house in Cambridge, paid for by my firm, on the strict understanding that you never again set foot in Boston. Emmeline stared at him. It was only business, Miss Hartwell. She did not move for a long moment. Then she said quietly, Mr. Blackwood, I have something to tell you. Please do. This is not the book. Augustus blinked. His slate eyes went to the black leather volume on the small table. It is not, he said. It is a copy. My father taught me when I was a small girl that a good accountant always keeps two books. The original is in a place you will never find. It was carried 2 days ago across Eagles Pass by a man who rode through a blizzard in a pair of your hired killers to put a telegram in the hand of the United States Marshal for the District of Colorado, a man named Wade Kingston, who is at this moment riding up the wagon road from Denver with 30 deputies behind him. He will be at the Chain Bridge in 1 hour. He will be at this siding by 3 o'clock. He will arrive, Mr. Blackwood, exactly when your train is scheduled to leave. Augustus Blackwood sat very still. You are lying, he said. I am not. Then his right hand moved to the inside of his black coat. And Emmeline Hartwell, who had been watching his hands from the moment she walked through the door, who had learned to shoot a rifle in a Colorado yard in 9 days, who had stood at a kitchen window that morning and put 4 rounds through 4 men at 60 yards, who had pulled a paring knife from a sleeve 3 weeks before in Boston and had never been parted from it since, brought the small knife up. The door at the back of the car opened. Silas Thorne came through it. He had come through the coal stove passage from the service platform. He had ice in his beard. He had his Winchester at his shoulder. He had the face of a man who had ridden 40 miles in 3 hours and had cut a broken telegraph wire back together with his bare hands on the way. Behind him through the door came a tall, older man with a silver star on his vest and 30 men behind him on the siding. Augustus Blackwood's hand came out of his coat empty. Wade Kingston, United States Marshal, stepped into the private car. Augustus Blackwood said the marshal for the murder of Elias and Ruth Thorne, the murder of Theodore Hartwell, and 45 other counts of conspiracy to commit murder in 5 states and territories, you are under arrest. Put your hands on the table. Augustus Blackwood looked at the ledger. He looked at Emmeline. He looked at Silas. He looked at the marshal. He put his hands on the table. In that moment, somewhere deep inside a house 40 miles up the mountain, Elijah Thorne, who had been sitting beside his brother Barnaby on a cot by a fire for 4 hours, looked up suddenly and said, without knowing why he said it, Papa. Mama, too, Barnaby, half asleep, whispered back, too, outside the private car, the snow was beginning to soften at the edges. Spring was still 6 weeks away, but the winter had turned. Hollis Blackwood was captured at dusk by 2 of Kingston's deputies 12 miles south of Timber Ridge on a blown gray horse, trying to reach the telegraph at Silver Plume. He offered them $1,000 to let him go. They took the $1,000 into evidence and put him in irons beside his brother. The ledger, both copies, went to Denver that night under the personal escort of Wade Kingston. The trial began in May in a federal courtroom in Denver and ran for 6 weeks. Augustus Blackwood was convicted on all 47 counts. He was hanged on the 2nd of August, 1887, in the yard behind the Denver jail at 7 in the morning. Hollis Blackwood was sentenced to life in the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas, and died there of consumption in 1894. The Blackwood Railway Consortium collapsed within the year. Its assets were broken up and sold. The 640 acres of Thorne Ridge, which had been transferred by forged will in 1878, were returned to the surviving Thorne brothers by a federal court order dated the 14th of June, 1887, exactly 8 years and 9 months to the day after Elias and Ruth Thorne had been buried behind their own barn. Silas and Emmeline came home to Thorne Ridge on the 10th of April. They came up the wagon road on midnight in Copper, riding side by side, and when they reached the crest of the ridge and the house came into view, Elijah was on the porch waving his hat, And Barnaby, who was walking now, though, with a cane, was standing beside him with a thin smile on his face. The snow was half gone. The first of the columbines on the south slope had not yet bloomed, but the green was in the stems, and the buds were tight, and Emmeline Hartwell, looking down at the homestead from the saddle of copper, understood for the first time what it meant to come home. Silas Thorne turned in his saddle and looked at her. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Silas, welcome home." They were married on the 21st of May, 1887, under a cottonwood at the edge of the south slope by a circuit rider from Silver Plume who had known Elias Thorne 20 years before. Emmeline wore a pale blue dress she had sewn herself because she would not and could not wear white again for the rest of her life. She carried a bouquet of columbines cut that morning by Elijah. Barnaby played the harmonica. Wade Kingston stood as Silas's witness. A woman named Eliza Gaines, who ran a boarding house in Timber Ridge and who had known Ruth Thorne from church, stood as Emmeline's. Silas cut his first beam for the new house on the morning of the 22nd. He cut it alone. He had waited 9 years for that morning. The house he built took him and his brothers 6 months to finish. It sat a quarter of a mile down the ridge from the main house south, facing with a porch that looked out over the valley and a window in the kitchen that caught the morning sun. The walls were 8 inches thick. The stone hearth was tall enough that a tall man did not have to stoop. Emmeline moved into it in October. She was carrying their first child by then. Barnaby carved the cradle. Elijah built the rocking chair. Silas built the door. The door closed behind them on a cold November night, and outside the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, and inside the new house a fire was burning in a stone hearth tall enough that a tall man did not have to stoop, and that was all that was said about that night. By the next autumn, there were 2 boys on Thorn Ridge. The older was named Theodore Elias Thorne. The younger, born in September of 1888, was named John Wade Thorne after Wade Kingston, who had ridden up the wagon road one more time to stand godfather to the baby and to bring as a christening gift a small brass star from the badge he had retired that summer. John Wade grew up to be an ordinary, happy boy. Theodore grew up to be his father. Barnaby Thorne never married. He lived on Thorn Ridge all the days of his life, in a cabin he built for himself behind the barn, and he walked with a slight limp in his right leg on cold mornings. He taught every Thorne child how to read tracks in the snow. He taught every Thorne child to play the harmonica because it was what his father had done, and it was what his mother had liked, and it was, he said, the first music a mountain learns. He lived to be 77. He died in his sleep on a March morning in 1932, and Emmeline Thorne, who was by then 68 years old and walking with her own cane, sat beside his bed for the last hour and held his hand and did not cry. "Winter always ends," she told him as his breath slowed. "Winter always ends," he said back, and then he was gone. Elijah married a widow from Silver Plume named Hattie Graves in the spring of 1891. She was 26. She brought a small daughter with her. Elijah raised that daughter as his own and had 2 more children with Hattie and lived in the main house with them and kept the land and outlived his wife by 11 years and died in 1928, the morning after his 71st birthday, of a quiet heart failure, with a deck of cards half dealt on the table beside him. In the first years after the trial, a man named Wade Kingston came up the mountain every July for a week of trout fishing. He came for 23 years until his body could not take the climb. He died in 1910. The brass star he had given little John at the christening stayed on the mantle of the new house beside the black ledger that had by then become a Thorne family heirloom. By 1900, there were 6 children on Thorn Ridge. By 1910, there were 9 grandchildren. By 1917, the main house and the south house had been joined by a third built by Theodore and his wife, Mary, and by a fourth built by John and his wife, Alice, and Thorn Ridge was no longer a homestead, but a community, a clutch of 4 houses and 3 barns, and a schoolhouse that Emmeline had taught in every winter from 1892 to 1915. Silas and Emmeline Thorne grew old in the south house. Silas never stopped building things. His hands shook a little in the last years, but he never stopped. He built toys for the grandchildren. He built a rocker for Emmeline when her back began to trouble her in 1908. He built a coffin quietly in 1915 and would not say for whom, and then said when pressed by his younger son, for whoever goes first, John, that is how a man keeps his wife from worrying. He went first. It was June of 1918. He was 66 years old. He had come in from the barn at noon with a pail of milk from a granddaughter of Pearl, the long-dead dairy goat. He had sat down on the porch. He had closed his eyes in the sun. And when Emmeline came out with his dinner on a plate, he was gone as quietly as he had spent most of his life, with his amber eyes shut against the brightness and his hand resting open on the arm of the chair he had built. Emmeline Thorne buried him beside his father and his mother behind the barn. She put no stone on his grave that summer. She could not yet bear to write the date. She lived 15 more years. She lived to see a Thorne great-grandchild named Emmy, born in 1925. She lived to see the first automobile come up the wagon road in 1921, driven by her son Theodore, who had to get out and lift it over a fallen log at the 10-mile marker. She lived to see the schoolhouse she had built become a proper two-room school with a teacher from Denver in 1924, and she lived to hand that teacher the key and to say, "This is yours now, miss. Teach them the Psalms. The words wait for the right person." She died on a morning in April of 1933. She was 69. Her son Theodore found her in her rocking chair on the south porch, her hands folded in her lap, a book open beside her. It was the Shakespeare. The page was As You Like It. The line she had been reading, marked by her finger on the page, was this one: "Sweet are the uses of adversity." They buried her beside Silas behind the barn, on the slope where the columbines came up every May. They set the two stones side by side that summer. Silas's stone said only his name, the years, and the words, "Built this with his own hands." Emmeline's stone said her name, the years, and the words, "She was home." 3 generations of Thorns stood at the graveside that day. The oldest was Theodore, 64. The youngest was a small boy of 4, Emmeline's great-grandson, who had been named Silas after the grandfather he would never meet. The boy put a small hand on the new stone. He looked up at his father. "Papa," he said, "what does it mean, she was home?" His father thought a long time before he answered. Then he said, "Son, it means she came a long way to get here. And she knew when she got here that here was where she was meant to be. And she stayed and she built this with us, and she is still here. Do you understand?" The boy thought about it. "I think so," he said. His father nodded. "Good," he said. "Then one day you tell your children, and they will tell theirs. In that way your great-grandmother will not be gone." He took his small son's hand. They walked back down to the house. Overhead, the clouds were moving east off the peaks, and somewhere in the black line of pines an owl called once in the daytime, which the old mountain folk said was the voice of a soul going home, and was answered from a tree further off by a second owl, which the old mountain folk said was the voice of the soul that had been waiting. And the columbine's small blue and white flowers, whose petals were shaped like a woman's folded hands, came up on the south slope of Thorn Ridge for the 46th spring in a row, since a woman in a wedding dress had stepped off a train at Timber Ridge Station on a January morning in 1887 and been found half frozen by a mountain man who had sworn never to save another life because he could not bear to lose one. Winter always ends. She came west with nothing. She was home. And that, my friends, is the story of the Winter Bride of Thorn Ridge. A story of 3 brothers who had buried their parents and thought they were done with the world, and of a woman who climbed down from a train in a dress the wrong color and walked without knowing it into a house that had been waiting for her for 9 years. A story of a ledger kept by a quiet accountant in Boston who believed until the hour of his death that a true book kept honestly in a crooked room is the last honest thing a man can leave behind. A story of a mountain and of the people who held it, and of a promise that was kept, not because it was easy, but because the people who made it had been taught by parents and by grief and by the slow turning of a winter that a promise is what you keep when keeping it costs you everything. If You Were Moved Tonight by Emmeline and Silas by Barnaby's Harmonica, and Elijah's Laugh by A Cot by a Fire in a Coffee Tin on a Fence Post Do me the kindness of hitting the subscribe button below. Leave a comment. Tell me where in this great country you were listening from when you came to the end of this one. I read every single one, and every name you leave is a small light I set in the window for the next traveler coming up the road. Next week, a cavalry scout comes home from the Indian campaigns to the Montana ranch he left as a boy and finds a widow and her 3 daughters living on his family's land with papers she swears are legal and a rifle she is not afraid to use. I hope you will join me then. Until then, friends, keep your powder dry and your eyes on the long horizon. Winter always ends.